Readers, I want to welcome every one of you to something completely different. You all know that my love for literature has just about no bounds. What might be not so obvious is that I get fixated on certain concepts and I just want to tell everyone this thing that I have learned. For example, this insane experience I had recently with English vocabulary. Way back when I did the lecture on Madame Bovary, I was listening to an interview that Lydia Davis had with Tyler Cohen. Lydia Davis being one of the smartest, most interesting writers I know. Tyler Cohen being someone that I actually don't have any context for whatsoever. So I'm listening to this podcast and we came to this part where Tyler Cohen said what I thought was the most stupid thing I have ever heard. I remember him saying something like, Lydia Davis, is translation trickier for you because English has twice the amount of words as every other language? And honestly, I can be kind of a know-it-all, especially when the thing in question has anything to do with my area of expertise. It's not a great trait. So Tyler Cohen said English has twice the amount of words, and my know-it-all self just kicked right in, and I was like, duh, she's about to annihilate him because there's no way that English has twice the number of words. And then Lydia Davis just absolutely blew my mind. She was like, yeah, Tyler, actually, it's a real boon to the English language that we have double the vocabulary. I'm actually going to read to you from the transcript. Oh my gosh, I'm looking at this as Cowen, maybe. It's C-O-W-E-N. In my notes, I have Cohen, C-O-H-E-N. Whoops. So, Mr. Tyler Cowen says the following. Do you worry as a translator that some languages are word poor? Which, honestly, word poor, that's not great. It's a bit of a leading question here. Then he goes on, this charge is sometimes leveled against French and Spanish relative to English and German. And Lydia Davis says this, I would be very cautious about accusing another language of having deficiencies, which, absolutely. And then, here it is. I do think that English has a wonderful advantage in having the double vocabulary, the Anglo-Saxon vocabulary and the Latin vocabulary. I was like, what? As I'm reeling, she goes on and says this, underground would be the Anglo-Saxon version, and subterranean would be the Latin of the same idea. I cannot tell you how long I just was walking around, absolutely marveling at the distinction between underground and subterranean. I love linguistics. I'm really bad at math, but I feel it's kind of the math part of language learning. And I've always had this kind of feeling that I should have just gotten my degree in English literature. Because honestly, when this kind of stuff happens, I'm like, how do I not know this about my own language? So, being the lifelong learner that I am, I got this book called The Adventure of English. It's by a guy named Melvin Bragg. His name is spelled M-E-L-V-Y-N. And it was not that long ago that I realized if you have a lot of Y's in a name like Melvin or Dylan, for example, Dylan Thomas, it likely came from Welsh. The Adventure of English by Melvin Bragg. It's a tiny bit old school. There's some pieces of it that I'm like, ooh, Melvin, get yourself into the 2020s. But it was fascinating. So I'm going to give you the very, very briefest of histories of the English language so that you can understand this insane concept that we have double the vocabulary. I'm then going to give you the actual numbers. And you know what? I was shocked. Continued to be more and more shocked. So we begin, with Sanskrit way back in India. This is the Proto-Indo-European languages. Eventually, Sanskrit is pushing west. On the island that is going to become England, of course, it's not called England at the time, the people we have there, way, way, way back, were the Celts. So the vestiges of the language that they were speaking, of course, Celtic, is Gaelic. So Gaelic, or Irish, is one of these languages that's threatened by extinction, but honestly, it is holding on. I tried to learn Gaelic in Duolingo, and let me tell you, that was a linguistic adventure that I did not enjoy. Complete failure, but wow, did it leave me with some real respect for actual, true speakers of Irish or Gaelic people, for example, like Paul Mescal. So we have the Celts. We then have the Romans. They come in 43 BCE. They're there until 410 of the Common Era. Those years are so specific that obviously big things happened in those years. I do not know what happened. I'm giving you the outline. So obviously when the Romans are there, we have Latin and Greek. The Romans really did not like the Celts. The Celtic language is being run over, which is part of the reason why we do not have a lot of Celtic stuff happening in English. So then, from right across the sea, my geography is also not great. If you're on the YouTube, I'll give you a little map of this. We have what was going to be Germany, and we have these warrior guys, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes. It might be Utes, I'm not sure, it's J-U-T-E-S. In 1449, they bust onto the island and they are kicking out the last remaining people of the Roman Empire. So that is where we are getting all of the German words that we have still to this day in English. Super interestingly, the word England comes from the Angles. Those Angles, Angle land, became England. But here's the crazy thing. So in 1066, which is like weirdly like the only date in my mind, I was just going to say that I have the date of the Gutenberg Bible in my mind, but it just went right out of my head. 1419, 1415. But I will tell you that 1066, and you probably remember this, is William the Conqueror, the Norman invasion. So here is where my history failed me. When you talk about William the Conqueror, because his name is William, I assume that he is an English speaker. I actually kind of like assumed that he was English, which doesn't make any sense at all because obviously he's conquering what will become England. But what totally escaped me is when we talk about the Norman invasion, we are talking about people who are French. Turns out that William the Conqueror is actually like the big, like I want to say the king, but I'm not sure he was a monarch, but he maybe probably. But he was like the big guy. He was like the leader of the Normans, which is basically the French. So what he brings to this island that's going to become England, that is now mostly speaking German with some vestiges of Latin and some tiny vestiges of Gaelic, what he brings is French. And there was a quick minute there where honestly, English speakers today might all be speaking French. It was like a real tight race in terms of whether like French was just going to completely take over or whether this kind of language that's the mix of Celtic, Latin, and German is going to continue. The crazy thing is that the French essentially gets folded right in. And one of the reasons why this happens is that English is very, very good at borrowing words. A lot of these Romance languages, and German as well, worked with inflections. So it was like Latin, where you would have to change the ending of the word in order to have any sentence make sense. What English did instead was we started using a lot of prepositions. So all of the words got simpler. You didn't have to change the ending. You just say the word with a preposition beforehand. It's much more flexible because as soon as you know the pronouns, you can slot in any word you want. Also, we English were not afraid to just suck up all of these words. When I was learning Spanish in high school, much was made then of the Real Academia Española. What our teacher told us then is that you could be fined for speaking improper Spanish, which turns out not to be true. That was established, by the way, in 1713. Their whole thing, and you had this in French too, was to keep Spanish very pure, to keep it very stable. And honestly, it's still sort of like that. Like, if you're in Spain, a computer is like ordenador, and a car is like coche, which is like, kind of a throwback to the coach. If you're in Mexico, a computer is computadora, a car is carro. You have Spanish in South and Central America being much more flexible and happy to borrow words and just alter them a little bit. In Spain, you have this very purist view of what language should be. English, on the other hand, I just really think we're kind of like mongrels here on the island of what will become England. And you can imagine you've got these different kind of, different people from Germany. You are folding all of them in with what was left of the Roman Empire. And then you have the overlay of French, and you have this weird mongrel language that's very happy to just suck up all of these other words. And that is how we have ended up with this double vocabulary. So just strictly by the numbers, we're going to do this in reverse order. And we'll start with Spanish with the cute little Real Academia Española. I shouldn't call it the cute little. It seems so quaint in some ways, especially now that I know they're not fining me. So the Spanish, the Diccionario de la Lengua Española, that was released in 2014, has 93,000 words. So in your mind, just think that Spanish has 100,000. Also French, 100,000. Like dead heat between Spain and France. Then we have German, which our friend Tyler Cowen, he said that it had twice the number of those Romance languages. Kind of, almost. Estimates now are about 185,000. So Spanish and French are at 100,000. German is 185,000. English? And honestly, these sources, I did not go through and check all of the sources, but I will say that all of these estimates are coming from essentially the same amalgamation. English is coming in, can you hear the pride in my voice, which is kind of ridiculous, but English is coming in at 500,000. So we really do, English is 500,000 words compared to 100,000 of Spanish and French. Even if those numbers are not precise, and even if they're actually a little bit off, you cannot really dispute the fact that English is a much bigger language, which shocks me that is something I absolutely did not know. But probably the most interesting thing of all of this, the thing that actually really did get stuck in my head, is the fact that we still have all of these words, these kind of double words for more or less the same thing, one of them being Germanic and one of them being Latinate. Latinate being the Romance language from Latin. and I'm just going to treat you to a few of them. One really important point that was made by Melvin Bragg is that if a word is identical in German and French, then we're not going to keep both of them. There has to be a subtle distinction in order for both to stay in the language, because if not, it's much more efficient, and language is always trying to be efficient. It's much more efficient to just use the one word. So what happens when you start looking at these words is the subtle differences are insane. So the one that Lydia gave, which was so nice of her to give that example that like floated around in my mind for so long, was the German was underground and the Latin is subterranean. So of course, my first thought with underground was like the subway system in London. But when I thought about it a little more, underground can mean like, if you have an underground movement, it can be kind of a metaphorical thing. To me, it feels kind of grittier. All of the Anglo-Saxon Germanic words feel like a little grittier. Most of the Latinate words sound a little more like they came out of like some sort of, I'm imagining those botany prints that have the Latin name for a plant. They all sound a little bit scientific, they sound a little bit more academic, not all the way across the board, but a little bit. And that actually kind of holds. A lot of these Germanic words are a little more blunt, they're a little more like urgent, whereas the Latinate ones feel, and this is my own thesis, like this is just in this small smattering that we're looking at, but the Latin ones feel a little bit more kind of flowery. Some of them feel just like a little more medicinal. For example, we have kingly and regal. So kingly, you can hear the K sound. That K sound is very Anglo-Saxon. And in my mind, if something is kingly, it has to have to do with the king. Like it's very specifically to do with a king. Whereas regal can mean, it's just something much broader. And also, honestly, regal sounds more regal to me. Another example, brotherly and fraternal. Brotherly, obviously, being the German one, and fraternal being the Latin. Fraternal, the first thing that pops into my head is fraternal twins. This is that kind of medical overtone I was talking about. Fraternal also, weirdly, I go straight to like the Greek societies that we have still on college campuses. A couple more examples. Begin, which is the Anglo-Saxon, versus commence, which would be the Latinate. We then have help and assist. We have dark and obscure. Obscure is giving me kind of that like technical feel, slightly like medical. Also obscure, again, seems kind of more metaphorical. Dark seems, well, dark is actually very metaphorical in many ways, but it also is a better description of like dark night. So I'm going to end it there. And honestly, I have to thank you for the opportunity to really dig into a question that was something that I was really turning over in my head. I had such a good time digging into this. And I hope that this little 15 minutes of my obsession was interesting and fulfilling. And that if you have these things rattling around in your head, a couple of those pairs of words, that it will be very satisfying and that your brain will feel very good just contemplating the incredible nature of the English language, which is apparently way more rich than I thought it was. So thank you so much for tuning in. Happy reading.